everyone, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much for making the time to join us today as part of our Career Chat series, where we put the spotlight on higher education. And I'm absolutely delighted that we've got three fabulous, inspirational presenters, practitioners, managers, educationalists, writers joining us today, and you'll see their names here on the screen. We're really going to focus today on, if you like, the changes that are taking place in higher education, and in particular we're going to have a look at some of the sort of big issues really that are of interest to everyone who's joined us today. And I'm going to encourage some participation in our webinar. I'm Deirdre Hughes, and I'm Director at DMH Associates. And let's just have a quick look at, it's fabulous to see that we've got people as far away as India joining us, and Bridgend in South Wales, in Ankara, in Manchester, in the northwest of England, in the southeast in Vancouver. So Kosovo, just use the chat facility and tell us, where in the world are you, and what's the weather like where you are? Hello, Gareth from Swansea, and Lumni from Kosovo. Great that you're able to join us. So our webinar sessions are always very as interactive as we can make them. And I'd thought about doing a little icebreaker today, but I thought there's such a lot for us to discuss. Here we've got a great lineup of the speakers, as I said, and I think we should really get stuck into the sort of real focus of the webinar. And isn't it great? Look, we've got people from all over the world joining us. And hard luck, Jackie, you're in London and the weather is grey, but it's not raining. Every cloud does have a silver lining, and great to see our colleagues from Ireland here as well. So this is really what the aim of today's session are, these sort of four aspects, which I won't read out because you've all had a chance to read that in signing up for the webinar. But what I thought we could maybe do is, now that we know whether it's warm, it's cold or rainy or not in the part of the world that you're in, I thought we could maybe start off with a little icebreaker in asking you to use the chat facility and tell us, you know, what is the key what is the key issue impacting on higher education, careers and employability services in the place where you live or indeed where you work. No right, no wrong answers, but just really keen to hear from you. What's the one big issue really that you think is impacting on higher education, careers or employability services? And I'm sure our speakers will be really keen to see whether it's a similar situation to theirs. So do use that chat facility. Student engagement, funding, virtual internships in South Africa, students feeling burnt out, not wanting to engage. That word engagement comes up quite a lot. Growing increase in international students. Fantastic, great to see these ideas. Now, before I introduce our very first speaker, what I'd like to do is actually just to put up a little short poll, just so that we can see whether some of the issues that I thought might come up in response to the question I posed. Let's see, given that we're all together here, what the majority view is. And just if I can ask Robert just to get the poll up so that we can all see. Remember, there's no right, no wrong answers, and I'm going to be looking at your responses throughout the session and see where we can weave in some of these sort of important topics that you have raised. So if you would just begin by answering this poll, what are the main challenges that lie ahead for HE, careers and employability services? So you'll see the list here. I can't vote, neither can our panelists, but please do use this vote and tell us, what is the big challenge that you think lies ahead? Perhaps my colleague Robert can tell me once the poll, we can begin to see your responses. I can't see it on the screen.
Well, people are still voting, but they're nearly all there in a minute. So I think everybody's just about voted. Yeah. Okay, I'll give it another couple of seconds and then I'll end the poll and share it if you want.
That's great. So it strikes me, looking globally at some of the issues and some of the research that's been published, that there are some tensions that exist around local versus global, and also the issue of COVID. And it's really interesting to see here that it's the legacy of COVID really that's impacting. So perhaps our speakers might want to respond to that as part of their presentations. And this whole business of local experiences of and exposure to the world of work, but not least to say that there are many others, other issues as well. So I'll have a look at that as we go through and make sure, as your host and facilitator, that we can pick up on those and respond. And just to say, the webinar is being recorded, and you will be able to get a copy of all of these slides tomorrow, as well as the video recording. So I think without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Anne Wilson. Anne is someone whose name has come up on many of the forums that I've been involved in, and indeed whilst I was at the University of Warwick, working there on a sort of part-time basis. Anne was and still is head of careers at the University of Warwick, which is near Coventry, or not exactly in Coventry, in England. Now, I'm not going to read out Anne's profile, but just to say that Anne is one of the most inspirational kind of people I have come across in higher education, not just because of her passion about the subject or her work as a practitioner, but also as a leader in the field in training the next generation of people coming through in making sense of this messy landscape, sometimes called employability and student support. So over to you, Anne. Please do introduce yourself, and I will stop talking and let you get on with your presentation.
Many thanks, Deirdre. That was a very generous introduction on your part. So let's hope I can live up to expectations. So thank you very much. I'm going to start by outlining some of the key issues impacting on higher education, careers and employability services based on some of the recent research findings. Some of the findings highlight the challenges we're currently facing in the sector. However, there are also opportunities both in how we engage with students and in how we can raise and strengthen our profile. And I was interested hearing some of the issues that you listed in the chat that are preoccupying you at the moment within your particular services and your specific countries. I think, first of all, and unsurprisingly, it is about the pandemic, its legacy, the legacy of COVID and the impact that it's had on students. And it's interesting to learn a little bit more about what students in HE are thinking and how they're feeling at the moment. And there was some very interesting recent research undertaken by Wonky with Pearson called The Secret Life of Students, where significant numbers of students were asked for their views about what how they felt about university and what was going on at the moment. So there are some interesting quotes here. So even though I got good at, you just change my slides so I can actually see my own slides, I just need to tweak the appearance of what I'm looking at. Oh, sorry, gone forward. So you can see on the screen a number of the things that students were saying about how they felt, how they felt that they were struggling with things like imposter syndrome, for example. Some of the feeling of the students for the last couple of years who've not sat A-levels as we know it, they've been internally assessed, have really struggled with imposter syndrome and feeling that they don't deserve to be at uni, and some have described themselves very sadly, I think, as the fake A-level generation. So there is a real impact on a number of those students currently and how they're feeling, which if you look at the way that has combined with the virtual environment that many have been operating in, that sense of disconnection from their university experience and how much they felt they belonged. So the belonging aspect of things is really important. Throughout the report, there was a correlation between those who lacked a sense of belonging with poorer mental health. And of those students who reported below average mental health, only 52% said that they felt they belonged at university, and 18% of those thought that their mental health was worse compared to those students who reported above average or above mental health, where 80% felt that they did belong at university, and only 4% thought that their mental health had suffered. However, 39% of all students agreed that they had doubts and didn't deserve to be at university, and 68% of students who didn't feel they belonged said they didn't deserve to be at university. So there was still a disconnect in terms of that sense of belonging. So that sense of feeling connected really matters. When asked what would help them feel a greater sense of belonging, students responded to the fact that developing more or closer friendships, getting to know other people on my course better, and meeting like-minded people were the top 3 things that they mentioned. So real social connection activities, things that would make the difference for them in terms of how they were feeling. Onto a further report, which is also very interesting. And again, a recent report, I think it was February, that HudCRES 2032 report was published, which was a collaboration between the Institute of Student Employers, AGCAS, Wonky and Handshake, where over 700 students were surveyed. 27% of students say the biggest obstacle to their career success is knowing what field to go into. So career support's great and comprehensive if you know what you want to do with your life, but less helpful if you're unsure what careers path might look like. So more focus needs to be put onto students who are unsure what they want to do. And of course, the irony is that careers professionals, we know that we are there and probably best placed to help those students who don't know what they want to do, but trying to get that message across to students in order that they feel they can come and see us without a career idea is the more challenging part of that. But ironically, this is what has led to some extent to the disconnect with students perhaps engaging with the support that's available to them. And the longer version of this particular quote is another interesting one, and which may resonate with many higher educational professionals, is building confidence and personalising services is important, because the fact is the students who don't know what they want to do or where they want to go are too scared to engage with careers advice because they don't know where to start. Say it's a careers fair, it can be overwhelming. The same goes for careers advice appointment. The first question is often, what do you want to do? So the fact that they feel nervous about coming, anxious about the fact they don't have an idea, and therefore disinclined to come and see us, coupled with the complexities of the pandemic and trying to juggle the stresses of feeling socially as if they don't belong without the kind of friendship structure that they might have had in a normal in-person experience, has really impacted on how students feel and how they've perhaps engaged more broadly. And this is a nationally felt set of feelings and views, not just particular to my own institution. It was also interesting to see in the HudCRES 2032 report what students actually come to careers services for, because there were some interesting statistics about where else they look for information. And they may come to us for opportunities, but actually Google is their first choice where they search for opportunities, not necessarily the careers service. We are mercifully, at least at the moment, first choice for advice and guidance, so that's a big relief for us all. And we are also the first place they might come to connect with employers. But again, and I'll come on to this shortly, that's been another challenge for us all in the UK in terms of in-person engagement, opportunities to engage with recruiters, meet them on campus, develop networking skills, in addition to gaining in-person valuable internships and work experience. Networking, we're third choice behind Google and lecturers. Careers fairs still number one. Again, okay for supporting graduate opportunities, but interestingly, we're almost equitable for CV and applications checks with lecturers, so that's a bit of a concern, and Google. So not much difference in where students are seeking their inputs on that expertise. Again, first choice on interviews, but again, not far behind lecturers. So interesting in terms of where students are actually looking for their expertise. Mostly it's us for a number of those things, but there are other, I wouldn't say competitors, but there are other sources that students go to when they're looking for this help. Students were asked as part of the report next, what should careers professionals prioritise in order to help students identify viable career options? And their views, and this was a really positive one, in curriculum careers education, yes, so that's good. So where we're striving to try and embed careers education into the curriculum, students agree that this is something that's important. Support with employer engagement activities, one-to-one appointments, and certainly I know from Warwick's point of view, that is one area where we've not seen a drop-off in student engagement. They like the one-to-one personalised approach to having a conversation. Either in person or virtually, both types of appointment for us have been equally popular, and that hasn't dimmed over the period once we've been going through COVID and lockdowns. Help with skills and strengths mapping, help with building connections to alumni, accessible labour market information, and self-service profiling tools, which is positive in the sense that certainly at Warwick we're looking in terms of the scalability of students and how they engage, at how much they can do for themselves before they come to the more time-consuming bespoke one-to-one appointments. So providing an increasing range of really good quality online resources such as interview skills and assessment centre training can help provide the scalability for some of those sorts of services. Careers professionals were also asked what our thoughts were about this, and again I won't read through all of these, but in the future, careers services will play a more crucial role advising and offering insights that impact on the curriculum. We'll need to look at tackling the inequality gaps in different types of population, and we are more than just employability. It's interesting that this week we're meeting with our wellbeing service, for example, at Warwick, to see where we collaborate and who, for example, ought to be responsible for topics such as imposter syndrome workshops. Should that sit within wellbeing, within the academy? Should it be a hybrid mixture of those of us working within careers with those experts, our colleagues in wellbeing services, for example? And then what about the concerns of careers leaders? Because one of the things that, as Deirdre has alluded to, we do offer a lot of training through HudCRES, our professional body in the UK, and we run an annual course for managers and leaders in here at Higher Education Careers Services. And before we run the programme, we ask the participants for what they consider to be their hot topics, things that they think are really important and that they would like to spend time discussing, and that helps shape the actual discussions that we have. So some of the ones that came up this year in particular were about extending reach and engagement, unsurprisingly, embedding employability, how to manage efficiently and effectively hybrid delivery. And please, if you've managed to crack that one, do let me know. I would love to know how that works efficiently and effectively. Support for graduates, in particular recent graduates, and how to keep the relationship with recruiters going when it's been a really challenging time. So recruiters have abandoned campuses over the last couple of years by and large. They're slowly starting to come back on now. Many have tried to run their own events, and I think there was one university in a webinar some months ago said that when they counted up the number of potential opportunities for students to attend in just the autumn term, if you included what the University Careers Service was offering, what individual employers were offering, and third-party organisations, there was a choice of 1,000+ events that they could have gone to, which, if you're looking at how to dilute a market and put students under any more stress in terms of the choice available, suggests a degree of overwhelm. Ironically, I think we find ourselves in a position now where many recruiters are actually struggling to fill some of the vacancies. So the idea of abandoning campus and virtuality being the answer to everything hasn't necessarily cut it in quite the same way that everybody has perhaps anticipated, even though it's been a huge financial and perhaps time saver in terms of recruitment processes. So moving on to look at strategic and practical approaches, I think there are some interesting things here. It's important, I think, at the moment, because employability is very much central stage in terms of the topic being discussed within wider universities in the UK. It's important that we claim our place at the table and attempt to get places on key committees where decisions are made. Career services are sporadically and variously funded and supported within particular institutions. There are big variabilities across the UK in the level of support that institutions provide for those services, even though students say that these things are important. Employability is important for them. But there are opportunities now, I think, to actually inform those discussions and bring our expertise to the table and become louder and more visible in that process. We need to have greater impact on campus. I think it's been probably quite salutary for a number of us working in HE that where we'd have had very high profile, very well attended events with several thousand students all over campus attending large careers fairs, those who've been in absence. And so we've got a cohort now of students who have had no contact with individual employers or opportunities to network for at least 2 years. So I'm relieved that they're beginning to come onto campus now. So we haven't had an entire cycle of higher education students missing out entirely on that opportunity. Impact is really important. Increasingly the use of data, and I know that Bob and probably David are going to come on to talk about how data is being used to inform the way that we shape our work and use our services to respond to our students. And then rethinking our service models with students as partners, involving them much more actively in design and delivery of the curriculum. And I'll just touch on a couple of examples of those. So the professional journal for higher education professionals, Phoenix, in February, there was an edition which focused exclusively on the co-creation and design and delivery examples of different institutions and how they'd approached working on system design with students, and in some cases a direct delivery. So Liverpool's a kind of extreme example where the entire front of house team is comprised of students who were trained up by career staff in order to run the office, and they've seen a phenomenal increase in terms of student engagement in their services as a result of that participation. Never mind the increase on the employability of the students who've been engaged in those roles. At Warwick, and I know a number of other institutions, we started requesting recruiters ensure diverse representation in speakers and representatives at the events that they attend, either virtually or in person. At Warwick, we've got an interesting approach to peer supervision. So we have the careers team meet every 4 weeks in term time for peer supervision, which is run by our counselling service, and we buy out the time of expertise to provide that support. And this was something that's set up quite some time before the pandemic, but the idea is that it supports the well-being of staff, whose role is increasingly supporting the well-being of students. So it provides opportunities for confidential exploration of discussions and issues and conundrums that staff face, so that they can receive support and guidance and an opportunity to air those concerns and reconcile some of those issues. So that's an interesting model, and I think we're probably quite unique in providing that. And then looking forward in terms of the opportunities that present themselves around the area of employability, I think there are some really pertinent ones. So the Teaching Excellence Framework in the UK has put renewed emphasis on the importance of teaching and learning and student outcomes, and the impact of the student experience and the way that students are supported to gain good graduate outcomes. I use that in virtual inverted commas. The Office for Students are increasingly chasing down value for money and what they see as a good, again, in virtual inverted commas, education, and what that means and how that is translated into a graduate outcome. Lots of contention and lots of discussion and dispute and disagreement around what that might look like. But actually looking at value for money for courses and looking at the correlation between the course content and the actual graduate outcomes after students complete their education. and what kind of earnings graduates can earn compared to non-graduates, for example, and students needing to be aware. So there's increasing emphasis on looking at the wider student experience, and interestingly, in some universities, the emergence of what we call student experience teams, so teams that are looking at the wider student experience. So for example, at Warwick, a group of people who are looking at joining up the processes for the student to help them make more sense of the experience that they enjoy, perhaps from a cynical perspective, looking at what that will do to the NSS, the National Student Survey responses from students, who we hope will have an improved and enhanced version of the student experience, which I think many universities have become very mindful of, particularly as a result of the pandemic. So opportunities to play to those agendas, have that seat around the table, are all to the good. And then the final point was one around Advanced HE is currently going through a refresh of something called the Student Employability Profiles, which for those of you who are as old as I am may remember, these are some years old now, and they are being rewritten. So the employability skills that students are developing through the different subject disciplines, again, a potential opportunity for engagement and conversation with higher education subject discipline colleagues to look at how you either extract and make explicit the skills that students are developing through their discipline, making them able to articulate and just define those more compellingly when they go for interviews for graduate jobs or make applications, making the case again for the need to make the skills more explicit, both in terms of marketing materials in the literature for students applying to university, but helping students see what they're gaining through their degree and how that contributes to their employability. So I will conclude at that point and stop sharing my slides.
Well, thank you very much. And there's so much in there, and indeed for our international colleagues, it'll be very interesting to hear you know, how some of these themes resonate with them. And just want to say that if people want to find out more about your work on LinkedIn, you've set up the Career Catalyst, and it's really highly recommended if anyone wants to learn more about Anne's work. So thank you for that for now. We've already got a couple of questions for you, Anne, but we'll, I think, introduce David now. In fact, I'm going to, in the interest of time, invite David to now share his screen. And really just to say that Dr. David Foster and I go back a long way. David previously worked at Queen's University in Belfast, where I was external examiner. And indeed, I've worked very closely with David at the University College Dublin, where he's Director of Career Development and Skills. So over to you, David. Tell us more now about your response to the topic. And colleagues who are joining us, don't forget the Q&A session at the end. Really, really keen that you don't hold back on any questions that you might have. David, over to you.
Okay, Deirdre, thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm in Belfast, so it is afternoon, and it is actually quite sunny, but a little bit cold at 14 degrees Celsius. So I'm nice and cozy inside the house here. So good to see you all, and thanks so much for taking part in the session today. I suppose what I've been asked to do today is to take you through maybe a situation in terms of the journey we've had at University College Dublin around the evidence and impact agenda. And I think I've been there for 14 years, as Deirdre says. I came from Queen's University in Belfast, where the UK employability agenda was well established and well underway by the time I left. And I went into the Republic of Ireland, where it was still an emerging agenda and a very different landscape. So I think at that time, certainly when you went to University College Dublin, we had just come out of that period in Ireland of what was known as the Celtic Tiger, where effectively there was zero unemployment, where technology, where property, where the economy had really buzzed in certain areas, and that had led to a very positive situation from an employment point of view, but as we know, historically quite a brittle situation. Because I started in August in 2009, I think I have the fame of being the last permanent appointment at UCD for a couple of years, because the government effectively closed down public sector recruitment at that stage due to the collapse of the financial situation in Ireland and the fact we ended up having to get a bailout from the EU. So at that time, we were asked to respond, obviously, to that changing economic landscape. We were asked to respond to the needs of students, and it was a difficult thing to do at that point, because up until then, as one very senior member of staff told me at that stage, we haven't needed a career centre for many years because everybody got a job. And of course, we all know that really it's not about just getting a job, it's about getting the right job. And from an economic point of view, you don't want someone who's in their own job and being unproductive and perhaps taking sick leave or whatever because they're unsatisfied. So the idea that a career centre wasn't needed was a bit bemusing, but it was what the situation was at that time. We were perceived as being something that was bolted on to the student service. Going back to what Anne was saying earlier, the idea of integrating careers and careers education, careers guidance, information advice into the curriculum was quite a step forward, and it wasn't something that really had been in the psyche in the university at that time. And we were perceived very much as an information advice service, not an educational provider, not to people who were developing students professionally and personally. And I think we didn't really have a place in the strategic architecture, if you want to call it that, of the university. We just were there. We have a very nice location on campus by a lake. So people would say, well, you're by the lake and a student can find you if they want you. So there maybe wasn't a lot of imagination there on the part of the university as to what we might do. And there maybe hadn't been an awful lot of proactive work done to sort of show the university what we could do. I think there was a bit of a culture that we would do a lot more if the university would only give us more. And, you know, there was a very real point there, because when I went, there was myself, a deputy director, a career consultant, and 2 part-time clerical officers. So there was really, you know, a need for more people. But I think the university couldn't really see the point in investing if it was only going to get more of what was already going on. So it was sort of quite a complex situation, something that you could sort of get your teeth into really sort of quite quickly and sort of try and move things along. I think in terms of what we were looking for at that time, let me just see if I can move on. Let me just try my. So I think really what we needed to do was find some way of situating ourselves and our work within the overall operation of the university and the overall business and mission of the university. I think we needed to do more to get some more, and we set about doing that irrespective of how few of us there were. And we did that just by targeting a couple of schools who seemed open to working with us. And, you know, we started to sell careers as part of an educational experience. I was lucky, having had that experience in Queen's. I knew how to position that. I knew how universities could respond to it. And we set about starting to create a story of what our worth was and what we could do for the university. I think I probably made a mistake of banging on at the university about an institutional strategy on employability. From maybe about the second week I was there in 2009, we eventually got it in 2018. So it took a while to get there, but we got there, and it has been great to have that on board. And as my boss said to me at that time, until the faculty are shouting for more career staff, it's going to be difficult to present a business case for more. So obviously, in a way, quite negative, but good at setting the agenda for what I had to do. I needed to get a model. I needed to sell careers as part of an educational experience, and I needed to get the faculty on board. Now, in terms of just going ahead and doing that, I'm sure quite a few of you are familiar with the Career Edge model of employability. This is something that I had sort of come across when I was doing a PhD into career decision-making self-efficacy, and I'd been in contact with Lorraine Dakerpool, one of the creators of Career Edge. And to me, this was just an obvious model that we could utilize at UCD. And if I'm being honest, I didn't necessarily think I'd still be using it in 2022, but we are, and we haven't yet seen the need to move to another one because it's still accommodating what our needs are. But I think if you think more broadly about this impact and evidence agenda, in terms of where I was at in 2009, 10, that sort of time, really for me, it was about showing the potential of the university, maybe to the university, maybe outcomes and impact are more what I was looking to do rather than use data in terms of hard numbers at that time. And we're now moving on into that sort of hard data place. But Career Edge, if you just look at it, was just such a revelation for the faculty. And we did some presentations. We were even funded in Ireland to present it to anybody in Ireland that wanted to come. We had about 120 people from across the country came to find out more about it as a model. And Lorraine came over and did a keynote at that conference for us. But the faculty really took to this, and they still like it because it was peer reviewed, I think, first and foremost. And it puts the degree subject knowledge and understanding at the core. And I think that was important, because what struck me one day talking to somebody quite honestly said to me, if all of my students go and do all of these jobs you tell me they can go and do, who's going to fill my master's places? And for the very first time I thought, I'm a competitor rather than a colleague. And that was something that I suddenly thought, right, I need to be aware of that, and I need to think about how we manage this. So Career Edge helped me do that, because really the degree was at the core. With my interest in self-efficacy and self-confidence from my doctoral studies, I liked the idea that the degree, or that the model, was really focused around reflection, students reflecting, students gaining in confidence and self-efficacy. And I do believe that if we can get students feeling confident in themselves with higher levels of self-esteem, well, then we empower them to do much more for themselves in terms of how they use their emotional and mental energy. So I would, if you're not familiar with Career Edge, please do have a look at it. I know Lorraine has updated, not necessarily the model in terms of this visual of it, but she's certainly done more work since around emotional intelligence and the factor structure that goes alongside this sort of model. So very practical. Everybody was able to see it. We've used it with employers, we've used it with students, we've used it with the staff and the faculty of the university. And you can see just how practical it is there, and how it shows the different areas that we want our work to touch upon, and the fact that our work as career professionals in the university needs to come from the point of view of, how do I enhance somebody's self-efficacy by doing this? And not necessarily from starting with the, I'm here to teach them how to do a CV, or I'm here to talk about emotional intelligence in the workplace. It's starting with, how do I get them to reflect, and how will I grow their self-confidence through the activities that I'm going to be engaging them in. So really, really useful model, and quite easy to map your work onto. So it really gives us that structure. So everybody in the Careers Network could see their work, and they could see where it fitted in. I think some people find it difficult as we grew to move away from that delivery of information sort of service that we were used to being much more interactive, whether that's simply getting students to vote during the course of a conversation or a class, whether it's getting people to critique a CV in a classroom rather than to have an informational style lecture, whether it's getting them to experience teamwork through team activity and discussion rather than talking about teamwork. So it really did change the focus. And you know, I've been really, really lucky that I've got an amazing set of colleagues these days, and they're just excellent at taking all of this forward for me. And I'm lucky in that I have the space to think about where we're going to next, while they do an awful lot of the groundwork with the students. I've probably covered this. I'll just run through it in case I've not. It really did give us the faculty buy-in. That peer review, that published model really had some focus there in terms of selling ourselves as an educational asset to the university. Well, then that focused on self-efficacy, on emotional intelligence, on self-confidence resonated too with the faculty, because obviously, you know, we're trying to do the same thing. We're trying to create confidence, independent learners and thinkers, and that really helped. As I've said again, providing an excellent structure for practitioners. And I would say it really sowed the seed for the university being open to the development of a career development employability strategy. At one point I was told, don't use the word skills, because the faculty are not here to get people skills, they're here to educate them. Don't use the word employability, because university is not about people getting employment, it's about education. And if they get a job, that's really up to them, and yeah, you can help them, and that's all fine. So, you know, it did come from a very, very low base, and I think the model really helps sort of deliver on that. In terms of the other outputs from it, you know, we did grow from a team of 3.1 full-time equivalent staff to 28. Now, of that 28, 4 are in our graduate business school, and they have the luxury of dealing with about 1,700 students between them, whereas the 24 in the main campus have effectively about 29,000 students between them. And of those, about 30% are non-EU, and about another 30% come from widening participation backgrounds. So it's quite a diverse curriculum, it's quite a diverse student body, and it requires a lot of, I suppose, appreciation of different contexts, appreciation of different starting places people are at, and the different levels of contacts, different levels of employment that people have experienced from home. So in terms of that, you know, the Career Edge really has come into its own in allowing us to really see our work in terms of a model and see our work sort of impacting in different people. I think one of the key things we've done is really moved away from an evaluation of our services, which was really around how much people thought of the session itself. It was good, and of course that's important, to get people to start to think about their increased knowledge. Are they enhancing their knowledge as a result of engaging with us? Are they, you know, feeling more self-confident as a result of an interaction? Would they recommend us to somebody else, and are they satisfied? So just added a few other dimensions to the feedback we were gathering, and we report all of our feedback to the university in both quantitative and qualitative terms every year. So really sort of was a lever for pushing us forward in terms of where we are now today.
Yeah, but these are really great points. I'm just mindful now of time. Time is always the enemy in these sessions. So if I could just invite you to just cover your final slide or slides.
Yeah, sure.
Lovely.
No,
Thank you.
I think we're
It's all great stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of where we're heading to now, and this really leads, I think, into what Bob's going to talk about, it really is getting more into the data and getting into hard data. So we're looking at some sort of research that was carried out by Civil Graduate Research, and we're looking at our satisfaction levels. You can see there that 53% of our students were satisfied, as opposed to 46% of the national average. Well, that's okay, but we would want it to be higher than that. People are acknowledging that we've done a fantastic job in giving them career services advice. But if you want to look at really what they're saying they want more of, and it goes back to what Anne was saying, a more personalised service. People who want to match skills, learn through their course. They're looking for more meetings about the career opportunities from their own specific programmes. They're looking to see what we can do to tailor the CVs a bit more to those programs as well. And while they're comfortable with interviews, we're finding that if they're asked to do a video interview, they're quite likely to drop out of the selection process. So in terms of what the data is telling us that we need to move in a direction of personalising and I suppose trying to target our services, given that they are still limited irrespective of the growth. In terms of what we're going to do, we're making good use of career registration now, which has been a revelation to us. If you're not using career registration, please seriously consider it as transformed our landscape. We now report into one of the university management team education group because we're doing career registration. I suppose for me, in terms of what I'm looking at is, you know, in 10 years' time, what will a career consultant job look like? What will a student need from a career service in 10 years' time? And, you know, are we getting integrated in the curriculum to the point where we might disappear as a central unit? And is that a positive or is that a negative? I don't quite know. But that's really where I'm at. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, David, and I do apologise at having to kind of interrupt. I think we could have a full hour on its own in terms of learning more about your service, but people will have your contact details. And just to say that David, he didn't say this, but at UCD, it's #1 in terms of Ireland's graduate employability for at least 4 years. So well done to you, David, and the team. Now, I think without further ado, please let me introduce Bob Gilworth. In fact, Bob will introduce himself, but just to say that Bob's got fantastic experience around looking at measuring, finding a system to measure impact. And also he's doing fantastic work at the School of Education at Huddersfield University in terms of training the next generation. So over to you, Bob, and then maybe participants, as you listen to Bob, use that chat facility or the Q&A around, you know, some of these issues about the future and what it might look like. Over to you, Bob.
Thanks, Deirdre. Hello, everyone. I'm going to use a journey analogy as we go through this, and it's going to involve some luggage and some maps, and I hope that will make some sense. And in doing that, I hope to also amplify some of the points that Anne and David have mentioned already around things like strategy and positioning, impact, data, narrative, those kinds of things. And I want to just begin by talking about positioning, because as Anne said, people's experiences will be different, but as a general rule, over the last 15 years or so, there's been a fairly clear direction of travel of the positioning of careers services in UK higher education, away from the peripheral and towards the embedded and integrated. If you want to know a bit more about some of my thoughts about that stuff, then you can have a look at that chapter that I've referenced there. But generally, we have career services that are extended and institutionally embedded. So in other words, their remit, their scope of activity is way beyond one-to-one guidance and opportunities to meet employers. It encompasses all sorts of other things, particularly around careers education, possibly placements and internships, maybe volunteering enterprise, maybe international mobility. But whatever it is, they are very strongly connected to the principal academic units of their university, usually through some sort of business partnering mechanism. And that's probably the most common type of higher education career service we have in the UK today. And this is really important because if career services are going to have an impact, they need a foundation of a strong strategic position. And if they don't have that, then having impact becomes more difficult. We also have integrated whole institution approaches, so those where there are central and distributed resources under a unified management, usually with some physical presence in the main academic units. So the hub and spoke model that you would have at Birmingham or Nottingham, for example. And just to pause there for a second and say that whilst all of this stuff, particularly if you're in UK higher education or Irish higher education, might seem obvious to us, the image of a higher education career service, which is a peripheral edge of campus activity, doing a relatively limited range of things and waiting for students to turn up, is actually alive and well in the public consciousness, and may well be therefore alive and well in the consciousness of some policymakers, and it's worth being aware of that. But coming back to the integrated, the embedded. So one of the leaders of one of those hub and spoke models at the University of Nottingham is my good friend and esteemed colleague, Dr. Nalini Thombar, and she wrote the chapter that I've referenced there about boundaries of expertise in HE careers and employability services, talking about the idea that if career services are to have impact, then they need to have expertise, but they also need to embrace the idea of being expert and sharing that with other people in their institutions. And the idea that being able to demonstrate their connection to institutional imperatives and to be able to deliver against those is also key. And we also know that data underpins expertise. So data is part of that currency of expertise in an academic environment. So if you take all of those things together, all of those things impact on the day job of higher education career services. They impacted on my day job as a HE career service leader for many years, but they actually impact on my day job right now because we are concerned with educating higher education career service professionals. And so when I teach the higher education in context module at Huddersfield, it does what it says on the tin. It's a strategy and policy and context module. It's not a practical skills module. They happen elsewhere on the program. But the idea being that those professionals will deploy their professional skills more effectively if they understand the environment in which they're operating, if they understand the importance of data and expertise and being on top of the data and being able to explain that to other people. So if you happen to interact with our program at Huddersfield, either because you recruit one of our graduates or you send some staff on the program, or you might take a student on placement, that will give you a flavour, and what I'm about to say next will give you a flavour of where we're coming from in terms of if you decide to engage with us in some way, or you may already do so. I'm going to talk about data, as we said, and I'll cover careers registration and links to graduate outcomes. But what I don't have the time to cover are other very legitimate ways in which data might be generated and analysed, because, as I said, I don't have time, and to be honest, there will be other people who are more expert in that. I want to just come back, though, to the idea of narrative, and talked about the idea of having the data, but also of having stories that win hearts and minds. And I want to talk about, in the journey analogy, the idea of luggage and map, and the idea of careers and employability, and the idea that we probably need to accept that the lingua franca is employability. People will talk about the institution's employability strategy, but I would suggest that as careers professionals, we need to make sure that that strategy is really a careers and employability strategy. And the way that I've tried to explain that is the idea that employability is about the relatively linear acquisition of assets, knowledge, experience, skills, networks, that people will take out with them as the luggage on that career journey. Whereas career is the personal and iterative defining of purpose and direction that creates the map or the sat nav that helps people to determine where they're going to go with all that good stuff. And that it's the personal career context that translates the acquisition of assets into meaningful outcomes for students, employers, and society. So that's where we were back at the University of Leeds in 2011-12, when we started to look at how we would gather data and how we came up with the idea of the careers registration way of doing that. So we had a narrative that had already been socialized throughout the community. The idea that our strategy was around helping our students to decide on the options to pursue, to plan, to acquire the right skills, experiences, and networks, and to compete effectively in their chosen fields. So the first part of the data collection, careers registration part 1, if you like, was about collecting data about that, the map bit, if you like. The second bit is about data about the luggage bit, about the acquisition of employability assets, principally work experience, particularly when we ask ourselves genuinely, what do we know about that, particularly where it isn't organised by the university itself. And then in 2013, Nalini and I did a presentation at the HudCRES conference, careers registration, a data revolution, and from that, this started to become more of a national thing. If you're in the UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, and you're in higher education, careers work, then there's a chance that you'll be aware of this, and certainly some of the people I know that have joined this session will be working with this stuff every day. But just in case you're not, here's a brief synopsis of how it works. It works on the basis of adding relatively simple self-report forms into the enrolment or registration, hence the name, process, and therefore it generates data for every student every year. If you have a look at that blog piece that I've done there, follow that link to that blog piece, that will give you a lot more background on that. 2015 to 2018, we had the HudCRES OFS National Learning Game project from led by the Careers Group, University of London, with 16 partners around the UK based around careers registration. And if you have a look at that link there from the University of London, that will take you to the pages about the project, tell you all about the project, and if you want, it will give you the opportunity to download a copy of the Careers Registration Practical Guide, and also a really nice article from Fiona Cobb. And as you can see, careers registration is now widely adopted in quite a lot of places, including UCD, as David said. And right now there is a project, a federal government project in Australia being led by Graduate Careers Australia, which is seeking to replicate the UK project in Australia, and I'm involved with that. What careers registration produces is data on career readiness in headline categories of deciding, planning, competing, or local variants, other labels that have been used by other institutions such as Explore, Focus, Action, for example, that you'd find at King's College London, or Explore, Plan, Apply that you'd find at St George's. So that's careers registration part 1. Careers registration part 2 generates data on work experience and the acquisition of other employability assets, usually within a time frame. And then every institution that has careers registration has those first two parts. But in recent times, what's happened, particularly through the Learning Game project and beyond, some institutions have introduced a third section, which is about occupational preferences, which is another map item, of course. It's linked to other key student data, which is really important in terms of access and engagement. I'll talk about that in a minute. And is analyzable at just about any level you want, and is cross-sectional and longitudinal. A couple of examples of output. These are old examples, but they still make the point. So this is an example of a faculty. So this is a group of schools in a university, undergraduate students going into their final year. And these are this is the distribution of the students and how they identify in the main categories. So you can see, for example, that almost half of the students going into their final year, biological sciences as it happens, chose it because it's bang on the average more or less for the university as a whole. And as the Learning Game project shows, not far off the average for the national average, that around about half of the students in the final year are still in the deciding phase. This is some output of a work experience, not expressed as percentages because the input is tick as many as apply, but you can see that that flags up things like 93 students are saying that going into their final year, they have no work experience at all. Really what matters is what does this mean and what do you do with it? Because having data is better than not having data, but it's not an end in itself. So to pick up on some points that Anne and David had made, and particularly the points that Anne made in the opening section, because this creates some, at least a very basic level connection with every single student, then it does provide opportunities to connect with all students, not the constantly self-reinforcing engaged minority. Although obviously including them, not excluding anybody. The key thing that colleagues have fed back to me and my own personal experience has been about changing the conversation. In my personal experience, I've sat there in rooms where there is a massive, massive difference between a discussion with academic colleagues about an abstract discussion about data, about people who left a year ago, or in the case of graduate outcomes 2 years ago, compared to looking at data that is about students who are here right now in a time frame that we can do something about. And that was like night and day. Targeting scarce resources, of course, if you've got the data, then you can make sensible decisions. So if half of your final year students are still in the deciding phase, then and you have that data, then it would be irresponsible to put all your resources into recruitability activity that's based on CVs and applications, for example. And of course, all of this adds to the professional evidence base for the careers professionals that are engaged. Student messaging, and this again relates to something that Anne pointed out in the first session. This idea that getting across to students that all starting points, including yours, are fine, and let's start there. If your starting point is, I don't know what I want to do, that's fine, let's start there. Now, some institutions have been able to generate automated responses that have really helped with that. Not everybody's been able to do that, but I would recommend it. I would recommend that where institutions can do it. Because this sits with the enrollment system, then it links to the rest of the student record. And that's absolutely critical if we're concerned with using the data to help tackle issues of equity and social mobility. So as Anne said in her session, you know, the issue about dealing with issues of differential outcomes, absolutely right. And if we're concerned with differential outcomes, then I would suggest we should also be concerned with differential access to opportunities and differential engagement with opportunities. And if we have data that can show us if there are issues and patterns in that, then that's got to be a useful thing. Opportunity awareness, information that comes out of that data on occupational preferences is really handy. It helps to show the breadth or narrowness of students' occupational interest, which is pretty handy, particularly in any discipline graduate market like ours in the UK. It also helps with employer engagement because it's powerful, as again, King's College London, the team there were the first to do this, was to be able to say to employers, I can show you that 837 of our students are interested in what you do. That's quite a powerful thing to be able to say to an employer. And it helps with internal credibility. So the idea that the Vice Chancellor asks a question of the Director of the Careers Service, you know, how many of our students are interested in X? And because you're the Director of the Careers Service, to him or her, that's an entirely reasonable question. But it doesn't mean you know the answer. But if you've got this, you do now. The key thing, I think, is in terms of impact, is the link to outcomes, because what we're talking about here is data that is data for doing the job, but it is also linked to the way in which we're measured. So what's happened over time is that through the project and beyond that, we've seen a very strong association between levels of career thinking, advanced career thinking going into the final year, and graduate level outcomes through Delhi or graduate outcomes. So there's a quote there from Manchester Metropolitan University, a very large university that has a lot of careers reg data because it's been using careers registration for a number of years. A student's career readiness increases, their chances of getting a positive graduate outcome increases. This is true across all faculties. That's an internal report, but I do have their permission to use that. The Planning for Success report that came out from DFE in 2017 says pretty much the same stuff based on graduates' views rather than those of current students. So essentially still tying in the idea of the importance of career choice, career thinking, career planning to graduate outcomes. So essentially what we're talking about is ways of generating leading indicators that can help us to think about strategic KPIs that are actually about helping our students, that will in turn support the outcomes that we're measured against. So ultimately, if we're going to have impact, I think one of the things that this tells us is that what we need to do is make sure we focus on both the luggage and the map, and that we make sure we put the careers into careers and employability. And to give you an idea of somewhere else to have a look for this, if you have a look at the Complete University Guide, and you can look at this for your own institution if you're in the UK, or just out of interest if you're not, look at the Complete Universities Guide, look at the name of an institution, click on that, look at the institutional profile, and you'll see the Complete Universities Guide shows not only the graduate prospects score, but it shows what they call graduate prospects on track. And basically that takes the graduate voice question from Graduate Outcomes, which asks, does this fit with your career plans, and puts it into the public domain. So there's another interesting link, I think, between the career choice, career planning, career thinking, and outcomes. So I just want to finish there on some examples of those messages to students that say your starting points are fine. There's loads of good ones. This is just a selection. So you've got Lancaster, you've got Leeds, you've got UCD, you've got Exeter, and you've got the University of Melbourne. If you get a chance, do have a look at those. And I'll stop at that point.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Bob. Again, you know, we could have just dedicated the hour in itself to that. I'm just conscious of time, and I do want us to pick up on just a few of the questions that have come up, and encourage our audience, if you can, do stay with us just for, let's say, another 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes maximum. I want to tell you a little bit about some opportunities that are coming up on the horizon. So ever so quickly, I've made a note of 10 key points, and we'll summarize those and again, make those available to you all. These are the things that came up in the chat facility. Question number 1, maybe over to Anne first. Question number 1 around, should there be a closer alignment between universities and sixth form careers programs? Any thoughts on that one, Anne?
That's a really interesting one. I guess it is an issue very much as to what careers provision already exists in sixth forms across the wider country. Great way you've got them and they are there. We often get asked as institutions, would you be able to come and join in with things that we're doing in terms of educating students about higher education? What's challenging for us in terms of either virtual or physical presence is often the size of the team and the nature of the caseloads that we hold within HE in order to do that helpfully. At one stage, we did go back to visits. I don't know if, again, for those of you who are old enough, long enough in the tooth to remember, careers professionals in the statutory sector used to do visits to universities in their area, at least, to connect with and understand and have a good knowledge and understanding of what the different course and provisions were, which was always really well received and very helpful for those of us at the time working in the statutory sector. I'm not quite sure that really answers the questions in terms of the joining up, but it did mean that representatives from local sixth forms and colleges, as well as careers professionals, were at least well aware of what was available to them in the region in terms of the sort of higher education courses. I think the challenge probably now is the level of resource in schools and the resource in higher education services to pull that off somehow.
Let me plant a seed really around that kind of localism agenda. It'll be very interesting in the future to see the role of universities and in particular careers and employability services in that wider careers field. David, a quick one for you. How do the values and strengths fit in to EDGE? Val O'Hanlon was asking that. Is there a connection, David, between values and strengths within the model?
In terms of the model itself, I mean, I think what it's focused very much on is exploring really students' own career sort of being, their career psyche, if you like, and that would include, you know, what they perceive their values to be with relation to career. It would involve all of their sort of self-esteem and sense of self, of well-being and self. So I think values come into that, certainly. I think preferred learning styles, preferred working styles, there's a whole plethora of things that come in onto that exploration piece and that career exploration sort of side of things that we all, I suppose, are very much aware of from our own training days about self-awareness. But I think it has moved on a bit and it's become a bit more sophisticated in terms of looking much more at emotional intelligence, looking at how your own value systems relate and connect to those of your employer situation, for example, if you're going to work there. So I think it comes in, if that answers the question, it comes into it all right. But I think it's one of those areas that needs to be, I suppose, part of that sort of coaching and educational process. I don't think it's something that necessarily every student is going to land upon without sort of direction and coaching into it and exploration of it, which I consider for everybody.
Great point. And then Bob, very quickly over to you. How would you suggest you use careers reg data in relation to the legacy, you know, created by the pandemic? You know, would you do anything differently, I suppose, compared to what you've done previously with careers reg?
I think one of the things that that probably is being done in many cases is to be able to link digital resources through the ways in which students perceive their own situation. So so to be able to use that as a pathway through digital resources, because as we've moved through the pandemic, obviously we've got kind of the idea of digital first, or, you know, digital by necessity, and then what we've got is, well, digital that works, that's kind of following on from that, and that's not going away. So being able to create an interface that meets students where they are using digital resources as well as in-person resources, that's probably an important way forward.
That's great. I just see here, I'm just going to wrap up now with a very brief summary, but also I see in the Q&A this important point from Danielle about how do you see the holding of careers provision as a professional service, you know, best practice, facilitating quality thinking, and mentions the student as an expert. I just wonder, again, because we are running out of time, I just want one very, very brief response. Is the scope for us to involve the student as experts more in the careers and employability planning and design, as opposed to looking to our traditional professionals as having the answers? So it's a yes or no. Anne, student as the expert?
Yes, it always makes me slightly nervous in terms of the definition of expert. Yes, in terms of knowing themselves, and yes, in terms of being very helpful in relation to what is going to engage their peers, because they are far closer to them and will certainly relate to that. So they can be hugely helpful in helping to shape what students will respond to and to develop a degree of expertise through that engagement. Lovely.
David?
Yeah, I would very much echo what Anna said. I think in terms of the Irish experience, students are engaged with in our periodic quality review process that we have to go through every 7 years. So as a key stakeholder, the quality reviewers will talk to all of our students, and obviously the review then shapes the service moving forward.
Great, thanks. And Bob, final word from you.
Yeah, I mean, I think from that point of view of engagement, and in particular from that, like, you know, how does the world look to me? How does the world look from my perspective as a student who may or may not fit a particular mold that or a particular impression that people might have of where a student might be coming from. So yeah, absolutely. You know, how the world looks for me, I think is really important.
Now, Daniel Gray, who I know very well from Nottingham Trent University. Daniel, you've planted a great question at the end, but we're really not going to have enough time to deal with it. But I think what you flag up is you're asking if the panel thinks that a national, the graduate survey and associated metrics in the UK are influencing or corrupting models of practice. So wherever you are in the world, whether you're in India, a colleague from Africa, wherever you are, really, can we just sort of finish by saying, Daniel, it's a great question. And I just suppose I would say in terms of metrics, my PhD is in the evidence base for careers. And I always say to people, think about the metrics and think about not just the quantitative data that you're required to collect, but think of the narrative and the stories that actually add to that evidence base. And I hope that today's webinar has actually given you some insight to some of these big issues. It's reminded me about the importance of learning loss and how we're going to build the confidence in students and get that sort of connectivity going again between their well-being, their confidence, and their exposure to and experiences of the world of work. And I just want to finish by formally thanking our brilliant speakers and reminding everyone that we are hosting an international conference. It's virtual on career development, Be Bold and Be Brave in July. So I do hope that you'll be able to join us. And again, if you want more information, I've got the connectivity to our events organizer. But I really hope you'll join us because this is just the start of a conversation on this topic. There's so much more that we can cover. Also just to finish really by just saying that, you know, the reason I set up these webinars was to try and help support one another in a very fast changing world. So there are some useful resources that you've had from our speakers. Please do make use of them. And this is just to give you an idea of some resources from DMH Associates. Look out for the Career Guidance and Wellbeing Toolkit that we're planning to publish shortly, which has been a collaborative programme between Careers Wales, Skills Development Scotland and the Career Development Foundation in Canada. The ink's almost dried on that, and I think it's a lovely way to end our session by thinking about not just the well-being of the people that we serve, but paying attention to our own well-being as managers, as practitioners, or as leaders in the field. So thank you so much for giving up the time. If you think that there's a webinar topic that we should be covering in our next series, just send me an email, do let me know. Most importantly, our speakers have done this work free of any charge, which I'm very, very grateful, as I'm sure you are. But it does help if we get some sponsorship for our webinar sessions, because not least it enables us to cover all the IT costs. But most importantly, I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for staying with us. You know, wherever you are in the world, stay safe. And please do remind yourself on a bad day in particular, you do a great job, and we'll continue to do so as we move forward with all these complex issues. So thank you so much. You will receive those resources, and do give us feedback. We always love to hear from you. We're not going to have a webinar next month. We're going to have a fairly concentrated time now on making our international conference a great success. And maybe you can help us by sharing the link with your network as well. So thanks ever so much. Thank you so much to our great speakers, and look forward to continuing the dialogue. Thank you.